It was summer 2010, and I was in such a turbulent internal place. Everything in my mind was just swirling, swirling, swirling. I was obsessed with trying to figure out if my faith, what of it was real. Was it hopeful thinking? Was it just some sort of coping mechanism for death? Was God real? I didn't know what I believed at all, and it was driving me crazy, and everything in my life was dependent on it. My family, my friends, my work, my whole career was all based on me believing certain things. And so to have all of that up in the air felt like my entire life was in the balance. So I Googled best spiritual retreats in the world. What I found was a week of silence in Assisi, Italy. Assisi, like St. Francis of Assisi. And I was like, cool, that sounds terrible. I'll do it. Like a week of silence was not something that I felt like comfortable with. I'd meditated a little bit up to that point, but spending a whole week of silence felt pretty intense, but that's how desperate I was. So flew to Assisi, sat in these meditations that were so long for me, and the quiet was so uncomfortable. And then eventually there was this breakthrough that happened, and the silence sort of like permeated my body. I remember I had been keeping a journal about my beliefs and trying to believe in God. And I remember writing in that journal that day about how there was nothing that I needed to believe in because God was all there is. And I felt so free. For the first time in my life, I was free in any sort of sustained way. I'd had little glimpses and mystical experiences of the presence of God in my life, but this was the first time I was just so inundated with it that what I felt like I was kind of like dissolved into God. It was absolutely amazing. Everything felt like it was speaking as the voice of God. I was literally dancing on these hills in Assisi where Francis used to preach to the animals. And when I walked into the tomb of St. Francis, I like felt his bones. I was like, oh, is this what the anointing is? I was just so alive and sensitive, and everything was like brimming with God. And then when I literally like came down from that mountaintop experience, it, over the course of the next few years, became more and more of a memory and something that I was actually trying to get back to. I could remember like, oh my gosh, like it felt so good to be that free. How was I there? So maybe I need to meditate more. I need to spend all that time in meditation again, or do something, clear out my mind. What do I need to do? And it was almost like the harder that I pursued that, the farther I pushed it away. Welcome to the Loving This podcast, everybody. My name is Michael Gungor, and we're in a series here that's called Magnificat, which is the same name as the album that I released several weeks ago now. And we've been deep diving into every song on the album, and I've been really enjoying this series, and I hope you have been as well. So glad you're here. Today's song is Remember. Remember, oh my soul, this is already love. I wanted to start this episode with that story about what happened in Assisi with me. Number one, because that's where I fell in love with St. Francis. And the verse to this song is partially inspired by a letter that was written to St. Francis from St. Clare. And if you haven't heard much about St. Francis and St. Clare, it's a very sweet, beautiful love story between these two who didn't have romantic love in the traditional sense, but they shared this divine love with each other that has inspired many of us through the centuries. And that love comes through in this letter that she writes, Frances. And she writes, "Dear Frances, words are never large enough or small enough to write you, but I try again. Good evening. I always think about you at this time of sunset. It's during this hour that I put aside everything about the day, which is not important, and hold to my heart our inner path, the love we know. It's a good practice. I can safely say that my small light in the garden of my heart has become a diamond. I feel quite strong and God shines very bright." I'll go to the next paragraph here. It says, "Frances, we share the true relationship. Many couples live together under one roof and never share what we know together. Sure, I miss sometimes not having more time with you in the small moments of life. Then I think of most couples living with one another day after day, but so separate from each other in their thoughts and feelings. Frances, we have fallen in love again and again, landing in the great heart, the garden that extends forever. The eternity we know is the true poetry of life. The canticle you share is music for the heart inside every heart." Oh, I love that letter so much. And this idea of the garden of our hearts and being invited into that place where there is only love, into the heart of hearts. That was sort of the spirit of this verse. And I know what it was like. I can remember what it was like to have left the garden after I was on the hills of Assisi, after I had danced and I was seeking that height of experience again. It felt like I had been exiled from the garden or something. And I remember that feeling. It was torturous. And so this is a song to any parts of us that have felt exiled from presence, exiled from love, and an invitation for them to come back home. So as far as where this song is on the album, it comes right after This Is Love, which, if you remember from last week, we have been in this just sort of swimming in the ocean of being that is love at this point. We've welcomed it all in, and it's been this celebration. And so at the end of This Is Love, it kind of like sinks down a little bit. Actually, even the key, it's still in the same key. And as I said the first time, these two songs are kind of sibling songs to me. They are both basically the same thing, This is love, and Remember, oh my soul, this is already love. So, and they're the same key, but it actually lowers from 440 back to 432 hertz again, which is where we started the album. And it just lets us sit in this presence and this love for a minute. At the beginning, we have some guitars and some flutes, and everything's being put through this tape machine and really kind of put into analog and really warbly. There's this little guitar part at the beginning that I like, and it's in an open tuning like this, and it's a bit chaotic. It's pretty fast and a little bit hard to play. And while I like the feeling of it, it felt just a little busy. And I actually found that by separating the two phrases into left and right, letting them play back and forth, that it felt a little less busy for some reason. One kind of interesting thing that's in there that I don't exactly know why it works, but I just slowed the guitar part like in half and let it come in sometimes. It's just kind of like this boom, 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 boom in the background there too. Then there's several flute passes there in the background, and then like a little bit of strings and keyboards and vocals and stuff. So at this point of the album, I just wanted to give us a minute to sit here, bathing and being just swimming in this love that's everything, that's all around, that's within. And then the verse moves into that, come with me into the garden of our hearts. And it's like this call to the beloved. And we've been swimming in it already and dancing and playing with it the last few songs. But it gets more intimate here. And it's almost like the playfulness and the rest kind of come together just in love. And it just becomes this one presence.
Come with me into
garden of our hearts, where it's only peace, only us. Rest with me within the silence of our soul, with the maple trees, with the sun. Remember, oh my soul, this is already love. A couple other musical things on these verses. One thing is I brought back the tree percussion again here, so you hear the percussion sounds from us in the forest again. And if you add some claps to that, you get like a nice little percussive section here. And then since this was a sister song with This Is Love, we needed the big bass chords still, you know? Keep the bass going with the chords. Also joining me on the verses is my friend Rebecca Newsom, who has this lovely, really innocent sounding voice to me. And I really liked being able to sing with her on this. Where it's only peace, only us. Okay, so let's hear it from this little interlude that starts before the second verse. Up until now, the strings have had a relatively minor role in the song, and even actually in the album up to this point. There's been strings a lot, but they haven't been super featured. But this song really kind of allows the strings from this moment to take a more of a front stage, which I'm really happy about because I loved the strings on this song. As I mentioned last episode, this was the biggest string section I've ever gotten to record with. I think there was 24 players, and it was out in New York at this beautiful studio out in the country, and it was with the New York Good Shepherd Collective, and so it was such an honor to be able to play with them. And then there's this instrumental section that says, dissolve in God. I really like this moment. Again, I don't know how many times I've said it on the series so far. Maybe I've oversaid it, but this is one of my favorite parts for sure of the album. Dissolve in God. And then it just, I feel musically it just kind of like dissolves. So if there's anywhere on the whole album that's meant to just like dissolve completely, where you don't even pay attention to the music anymore, you just sit back and rest as being, this is that moment. There's this moment in the space that I bring up the words Om Namah Shivaya. And these days, I'm really kind of sparse with my religious language. And when I do use religious language these days, I usually try to skew a little bit more towards Christian language because I feel like there's an opportunity in the culture that we're in right now to actually reclaim some of these words in a way that is more true to how Christ used these words, and some of the early mystics and desert fathers and mothers used the language that later became co-opted by Christian empire. And one thing I've noticed is that the Christian tradition has become so prominent in the world. It has become so mired with power and empire that a lot of the words have totally taken on backwards meaning and have been enforced by literally like armies and kings, and there's been like heresy trials and witch burnings and holy wars. And a lot of it's been around like ideas, theology, and the meaning of words. And I've noticed a lot of defensive mechanisms come up around this kind of thing. When I start talking about Christianity, like on social media or other places, people often start getting really angry because sometimes I'm using language in ways that I'm not supposed to, according to the Christian empire. But then there's this predicament of, okay, do we just let the Christian empire actually pervert and distort these words that were spoken by Yeshua? And maybe the answer for you is yes. But for me, I just think it's too entrenched in the culture to not fight this fight, because the only option that we have when we deconstruct from Christian empire, when we deconstruct our idols and the limitations of Christian empire become seen by us, if we let the empire hold the tradition and gatekeep how we can use the language, what we're left with is now we have to come up with an entirely new language to talk about the deepest mysteries of life. Like, what do we call the reality in which we live and move and have our being if we can't call it God because the Christian empire owns that word? Maybe we call it the universe or love, but we're stuck basically having to invent language that now we also have to communicate to others what we mean by that language. So we're either kind of hodgepodging it from like different secular sources, or some of us just switch traditions entirely and like, okay, what about Buddhism or Hinduism or Taoism? Because sometimes there's more room, more felt room in those traditions that we can continue to grow and evolve. But I don't think it needs to be that way. I don't think we have to leave the entirety of our culture and our language and our mythological meaning-making stories in order to keep growing. And I don't think we need to let the empire have the final say on what these words mean. I think they've distorted them and perverted them from how Christ originally spoke them. Okay, soapbox rant done for now. And that was basically all just to say that I've been using more Christian language. But this particular phrase is still just dear to my heart from my time in exploring other religions and traditions. Om Namah Shivaya is a call to Shiva. And I spoke a little bit about Shiva on an earlier episode, but let me recap. Shiva is the aspect of the divine that is spaciousness. The masculine, it's the divine masculine. And in the mythology of Shiva and Shakti, Shiva is emptiness. He is the void. He is the spaciousness in which everything arises. And then Shakti is basically the divine feminine, which is, in the tantric tradition, more of like the form, the movement, the power, the form of existence. And so the story goes that Shiva was in deep meditation, just resting as void, and could not be disturbed by anything or anyone until Shakti came along and allures him in a way that he'll actually open his eyes a little bit and engage in form. And the love between these two is sort of the dance of the universe, emptiness and form. And it's so easy to get caught up into form in a way that we forget the emptiness that is the context for form. Here, let me give you an example to illustrate what I mean. Listen to this. Okay, what was that? You might answer, you're clapping your hands. But I'm looking at Pro Tools right now. I'm looking at this screen and I can see the waveform that I just did in clapping my hands. And there's three little like skinny shapes that are the waveform of the claps. But in between those three claps is emptiness. There's actually mostly silence during that. You heard three claps, but you heard way more silence. But our mind tends to move to the form, not the silence. And this is a really useful tool that our brains have to pay attention to changes in the environment, to pay attention to form, because that's where all the threats are, right? There's no silence that's going to eat you like a lion's going to. So our brains are always on the lookout for like, what are the waveforms in the environment? What's changing? What's moving? And so again, that's helpful for survival, but it's actually when it comes to truth and to the essence of our being, it makes us feel like we are one of the waveforms among all of the waveforms, all of this movement of the universe. And I'm this one, and you're that one, and this lion is that one. And the truth of the matter is all of it, when you get down, like we look even under a microscope, and then you go down, down, down into what we call form, eventually you just find a whole lot of space. Form turns out to be space in the end. I love the Heart Sutra. There's this scripture in Buddhist text called the Heart Sutra, and it says, emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. And this is the non-dual nature of reality, that it's not ever just one side of things. There's always the unseen side. When you're looking at one thing, there's always an opposite side to it. And so when we're looking at the world and we see form, it can be important to remember the context of the form is silence, is spaciousness, is void. And in a way, I think this is what religion is. This is sort of what spirituality is remembering the space. Because so many of us are just so engaged, and not just engaged, but identified with the movement of our lives. We're identified with our minds and the thoughts that appear in our minds and how we're feeling today and the job that I have to do and my roles and my relationships. And as beautiful as all that is, if we're lost in just the form, if all we can hear is the noise and we don't allow the silence to permeate it, everything just becomes chaos. Everything just becomes more and more hellish. Shakti and Shiva balance each other. So they are one, yet they're somehow distinct. It's sort of like Father, Spirit, Son, I think. It's like this movement of stillness. And because we're so busy moving, sometimes it takes some remembrance to remember. Om Namah Shivaya. Remember the stillness. Remember the peace that you are. And so that's what is being called in this section of music here, where it just kind of dissolves into God, dissolves into void, and lets us be that stillness. And then the strings take us all the way out, and we allow the strings to build from this sort of like filtered tape, distorted thing, and they start growing and getting brighter. And it's like we're just moving into the light, where void and light become one. Hymnal, and we're just with the voices singing, remember, oh my soul, this is already love. So I'd like to play the whole song for you here in a minute. But just before we close out this one, I'd just love to invite your heart to rest here for a moment. Here in this moment, whether you're in the car, you're on a walk, you're in your house, whatever you're doing, just notice your body. Notice your breath. What does this moment feel like? Are there any emotions present? What about the senses of your body, all five senses? You just check in with your taste, your smell, your feeling of touch, your hearing, your sight. And what if you just take in this moment completely? For a moment, What would it be like to stop trying to judge it, to stop trying to be anywhere but here? This is what remembrance is. And the title of this song, it's re-member, because we're not talking about remembering as like an act of memory. I'm not talking about just like being sentimental or remembering something from the past. It's actually more like putting back together, remembering. You could think of dismembering. And how often do we dismember the moment that we're in? Where rather than feeling the fullness of it, we dissociate from it in some way. We push away feelings that feel uncomfortable or sensations that feel like too much. We stack thought upon thought. We get lost in our thoughts where we think about the future and the past in a way that we sort of leave right here and right now. And remembering who we are is not a philosophical exercise. It's not a theological idea. It's literally just relaxing. Not relaxing in an escapist or bypassy way, but letting all of that tension of trying to hold on to a future and a past and an identity, just letting it be, letting it go, letting what is be what is. And that's not the same thing as complacency. In fact, you can find a way to very actively be this, to be here. Being here and now is what you are. It is already active. You don't need to add onto it this extra layer of needing to figure it out or needing to control it or needing to get something from it. What if you just let it be this? This is what remembering is. It's reassembling, remembering the moment, because this moment is all there is. That's what was happening when I was on the mountaintop of Assisi dancing in freedom. Suddenly I wasn't lost in my mind about trying to figure out who God was or if I believed in God anymore. It was none of that. It just was the breeze and the sun and the dance. And I was free. And then it's so easy to turn those experiences into an idea and try to grab them again, to try to turn remembering into some sort of like spiritual quest. But there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to achieve. There's no one to become enlightened or climb up the mountain where you'll finally get to God. It's just here. This is God. This moment. This is what God's face looks like. Look around. The dance of Shakti and Shiva, or the dance of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. This is what it is. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. This is what it tastes like. This is what it smells like. Can you just open up and remember? Thanks for being here. And thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week. Here's the full song, Remember. Into the garden of our hearts, where it's only peace, only us. Rest with me within the silence of our soul, with the maple trees, with the sun. Remember. is already love. Stay with me and we can sing the dust and light. There is nowhere else we belong. Dancing within the music of our heart, whether you and me dissolve in God. Remember all my soul. Remember all my soul. Which is the